Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another incredible guest introduced to you now. Dr. Cate Shanahan is the leading authority on nutrition and human metabolism. Cate Shanahan, MD, is a Cornell-trained physician scientist whose works have inspired entire movements involving bone broth, live culture ferments, and seed oil-free business empires. Together with NBA legend Gary Vitti, she created the LA Lakers Pro Nutrition Program, which has been emulated by elite championship teams around the world. She is board certified. She is a board certified family physician with over 20 years of clinical experience, and she is the New York Times bestselling author of The FatBurn Fix, Deep Nutrition, which is one of my absolute favorite books ever, Food Rules, and her latest book, Dark Calories: How Vegetable Oils Destroy Our Health and How We Can Get It Back. Dr. Cate's expertise is fixing the underlying problems that cause metabolic damage and inflammation, leading to autoimmunity, weight gain, diabetes, cancer, and accelerated aging processes. Her passion is helping people recover their health and feel their best. She's also the medical and scientific advisor at CB Supplements, overseeing their premium grade multi-collagen protein with our former podcast guest, Charlie Bales. You can learn more about Dr. Cate at www.drcate.com. Dr. Cate Shanahan, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much, Casey. It's a delight to be meeting with you.
It's so great to finally meet you. I remember an article that I came across. It must have been a decade ago, maybe 2013, 2014, in CBS Sports, and it was titled something like Nutrition in the NBA. And you were the first person that was mentioned. And to hear about some of these athletes and the things that they were doing nutritionally was so misaligned with what their goals were. I remember specifically Superman. What is his name? They called him Superman. He was super fit, the basketball player.
Dwight Howard.
Yes, thank you. Dwight Howard was eating so much sugar. I want to say you were quoted in that article as saying like his hands were almost like oven mitts, like so much inflammation. He was eating up to like what was the equivalent of like 24 like Hershey's bars in a day or something like that.
Yeah, pretty close. Good memory. It was a 22 is what I calculated in terms of just like the various types of candy and sugar he was getting from soda, not even counting from fruits. So yeah. And yes, it was affecting his performance. So that it was like he was wearing oven mitts because the ball, people would toss him the ball as he was standing under the basket and he couldn't catch it. It would like bounce off his hands. Like he just wasn't having the sensation that he needed. And it was really devastating the team, their morale, the relationship between Kobe and Dwight. And it was all a metabolic problem that was stemming from his diet. People had told him about the sugar, but nobody had told him about the vegetable seed oils or, even what they were, what they did to him or anything. So yeah, it was really an eye-opening. And the reporter who put that article together, his name was Ken Berger. He actually he was so interested in this new way of talking about nutrition and diet that he actually ultimately a couple of years later, he left CBS Sports and started his own kind of coaching business.
Wow, that's fascinating. I have to reach out to him. That sounds like really interesting. It definitely impacted the way that I was helping people kind of change their diets. For most of my career, I was using metabolic carts to measure people's metabolism and show like, how many calories they would be burning at different intensities or while they were resting and how much fat versus carbohydrate they were burning. And for a time, I was testing some of the Real Salt Lake players that were local to me. And some of these younger athletes would come in and their metabolic rates were not really that great and kind of low, and they were all sugar burners. And sitting some of these kids down and being like, look, you're a professional athlete, you're 23, you can get away with this now, but do you want this to be your career for the rest of your life? Like, this is your longevity. Like, think about your joints and the injuries you're going to go through. And like, when you're eating, oatmeal, like commercial oatmeal and orange juice before games, and you're doing that all day long, like, you're not going to have the best longevity if you want to keep doing this for your entire career. You're going to get away with it now, but it's going to catch up to you.
Yeah, and it probably already had, like you were saying, if their metabolism has to be optimized. And if they're eating seed oils, it's not. You're just not getting the energy. And that's something that I knew that the seed oils promoted inflammation. I knew that inflammation disrupted metabolism, but even I did not know what I've since learned about how these vegetable oils disrupt your metabolism's ability to generate energy for your muscle cells and your exercising cells, and even for your heart. right? So the seed oils disrupt all of that. And that is just so not talked about. Like I discovered a lot of people who were doing research that supports that claim, but that wasn't out there out in sports medicine. And it still really isn't, sports medicine itself, sports nutrition specifically is so heavily influenced by kind of like the dark forces, like the Gatorades and the industry itself. So sports nutrition in many ways is even worse than regular medical nutrition and dietitians now, because at least in the medical world, doctors are waking up to the benefits of cutting carbs, but that's such a sacrilege to sports nutritionists and sports
That's right.
dietitians. It really stood in the way of a lot of the progress that we could have made with the Lakers, because even though I was officially on staff with the Lakers, a lot of the top players, they have their own nutritionists and dietitians anyway. And we were, saying opposite things. So it's tough. The players are caught in the middle. They don't know who to believe. And, I empathize with that, but, hopefully we will change that. We will continue working towards, getting the myth out, the myths that have distorted nutrition science for so many years that I talk about in Dark Calories.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I mean, going back to Deep Nutrition again, one of my favorite books. I have to tell you, like, there was a time for several years. It's on my bookshelf now, but I would keep it in my car all the time for like years. And anytime I had to wait for some appointment or whatever, I would pull it open. It wouldn't even matter what page I flipped to. It was always fascinating and understanding, how heart disease was kind of how that process actually works. And seed oils you wrote about extensively, especially in the brain, and like how our nutrition effects are aesthetic and all of this stuff. I had no idea you could make all those connections. You did such a good job writing that book, and you wrote so much about seed oils back then. I thought it was fascinating that now with Dark Calories coming out, you were able to go even that much deeper. And in 10 years and change, you've learned so much more and all the nuance to it. It's really quite crazy. So first of all, I want to ask you the name Dark Calories. I love the name. Why did you want to come up with that name? What kind of an impact did you want it to have with the title of the book?
Well, thank you for saying all those nice things about Deep Nutrition. I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you. But yeah, so Dark Calories, the name popped into my head in like one evening, wintry evening in Colorado, where I used to live in 2016, because I was just feeling like I wanted to write. It was before I wrote my book, The FatBurn Fix, and I wanted to write this book then, because I had just finished Deep Nutrition, and I was like coming up against the same medical misbeliefs over and over and over again around cholesterol, right? And because when people eat healthy, when they cut out the seed oils and they eat healthy fats, it raises their cholesterol. And then if anybody engages with the medical system, their doctors are going to, the hairs on the back of their necks are going to go up when they look at their cholesterol levels. And it was just like, this is all based on a lie. It is just it's really like a crime that the American Heart Association has gotten away with this lie since they invented it in the 1950s. And it was bad enough that they invented it and it was wrong then. They've just built on it now, and they've exported this lie around the world. So they basically killed billions of people. And so it's truly like a crime story. And that's why I was just thinking, yeah, it's dark. I was just like, what? That's the name, Dark Calories. These are dark vegetable oils. Their history is dark. People don't know what they are. They don't know that they're eating them. It's like they're invisible. And they've flown under the radar. Doctors don't know, that they could be bad. Doctors are miseducated about them. So nobody has considered them. Very few people looking for root causes of diseases have considered them as a possible dietary cause. And that's left us in the dark. That's left medical science in the dark, because they don't know that the answers are so simple to so many serious problems. I'm talking about cancer and dementia and diabetes and the obesity epidemic and allergic disorders and autoimmune diseases, literally every metabolic disease and every degenerative disease, since it accelerates the aging process. That's why they're dark.
That is a very dark story. You do such a good job telling it. I change my mind about this probably every 30 seconds. If you were to ask me, as I've been studying nutrition, I'll probably change my mind about this again every 30 seconds. It's interesting to ask seed oil experts which is worse, vegetable oil or carbohydrate. I go around and travel to low carb Denver. And when I asked Dr. Chris Kenobi and when I asked, Tucker Goodrich and all of your mutual friends who study seed oils, I always ask them, why am I traveling to low carb Denver and not low seed oil Denver? What is worse, carbohydrates and sugar or seed oils?
Well, it's definitely the vegetable oils, vegetable seed oils. And I didn't know that when I first wrote Deep Nutrition. So the first edition of Deep Nutrition came out in 2009, and I gave sugar and vegetable oil kind of like equal weight. People were asking me the same question, like, which is worse? And I'm like, I don't think they're both really bad. But then as I learned more and I, kept digging into, I kept asking myself questions, what is causing disease? What is the root cause of obesity? What is the root cause of these inflammatory disorders? And I kept finding oxidative stress as the root cause. And that's a chemical term for a type of pathology that damages cells and kills them. And it's found in evidence for oxidative stress being a causative agent of disease is found across every disease that has been studied. When pathologists, study tissues of people who had any sort of dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, you name it, multiple sclerosis, it's not dementia, but other neurologic disorders, they see evidence of oxidative stress. They see basically oxidized proteins, oxidized fats, oxidized just junk in the cell. And so there was just continually more and more evidence that oxidative stress is really the root cause of more diseases and oxidative stress is driven by vegetable oil, whereas the sugar toxicity is called glycation. And oxidative stress drives glycation, but glycation is not involved in quite as many disorders. And sugar consumption will spike your blood sugar temporarily and cause glycation. That's why sugar's bad. So I think maybe we should talk about that a little bit, like talk about oxidative stress versus glycation. Because
Love
that's
it.
really the battle. That's the battle,
Yeah,
right? Like which
I
one's
love it.
worse?
Yeah, I love it. And I just did a seminar all about cholesterol. And we talked about the things that damage the epithelial lining as an example. But let's talk about the difference between glycation and oxidation, how those are different, and how seed oils and vegetable oils drive that process.
Yeah, so sugar is sticky. And when you feel the tackiness of something like jelly or dried juices or something, you feel the tackiness of something that's sugary on your skin, you're actually feeling those bonds breaking. So the glycation is a bond that has formed between a sugar molecule and an amino acid. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. That's what your skin is made out of. So you're actually, that tackiness is those little bonds breaking. And so you can feel glycation, which I think is really cool. So that's just a high level, what is glycation? Now, why is it bad? Well, your joints, for example, need to be very lubricated, right? But sugar is sticky. It's kind of the opposite of lubrication. So I've described it as kind of like a rusting process for your connective tissues. It's unlike a bicycle chain, which kind of when it's rusted, you got to, throw it out. Well, our body's tissues, they can clean up some of that damaged area. They have like what's called RAGE receptors for cleaning receptors for advanced glycation end products on the surface of the cell. They can actually clean up areas of the cell that have been harmed by sugar. So like you might have, people have told me that they have a lot of candy or sugar or anything that spikes their blood sugar. The next day, they often wake up where they feel it in their fingers or their knees or their ankles, their joints. And it lasts for a couple of days. Well, it doesn't last forever because the body can repair that stuff. So that's like one example of what glycation does. And what is it? Now let's talk about oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is also damages cell membranes and damages our cells. But we don't feel it so much as like a stickiness. What we feel is inflammation when our bodies are undergoing an acute episode of oxidative stress. That'll happen anytime. It can happen in normal life, right? Oxidative stress is part of normal life, but we have to be able to control it. And when you look at the time frame that these reactions occur of glycation from sugar or oxidative stress from a diet that promotes oxidative stress, mostly rich in vegetable oils, oxidative stress destroys large bunches of molecules. It can destroy like 1 billion molecules per second. And each one of those damaged and destroyed molecules has the potential to become a catalyst for another destructive reaction. So it's basically like an explosion, a miniature explosion. So just on the time scale alone, oxidative stress is more of a threat to our health because glycation occurs over periods of seconds to minutes to hours. An interesting little fact about glycation. I mean, glycation occurs in food too, right? Did you know that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a browning reaction, and we call it
Yep.
the Maillard
Maillard
reaction,
reaction. Yep.
right? So things get brown. So the same thing happens in our collagen. You can take collagen from a newborn and it'll be pearly white. You can take collagen from a 90-year-old and it'll look like toast. It'll be the color of toast. But it takes decades, right? It takes decades. But oxidative stress can destroy tissues in much quicker time frame. The whole purpose of an inflammatory reaction, oxidative stress triggers inflammatory reactions, and it has to be quick because when we puncture, when we puncture an artery or capillary, we got to clot that blood really quick so we don't bleed to death, right? So oxidative stress is on a fast time scale, and our body capitalizes on that when it drives inflammation reactions on purpose to solve the problem. And it's just, it can change the way your body looks in a matter of minutes. If you sprain your ankle and it swells up the size of a grapefruit, that's oxidative stress driving an inflammatory reaction. You just don't see glycation doing stuff that quickly. So that's why, that's just one reason why I think it's worse. There's several others.
Yeah, it's such a good explanation. I really appreciate that level of detail there. And maybe you do such a good job of this in the book as well, where you actually talk about vegetable oil. Sounds pretty benign. Must come from vegetables, right? It's got to come from celery or carrots or something. Not one drop of vegetable oil ever comes from vegetables, just to be clear. And you kind of talk about the process of how oil is even made, and the reason why it would not be possible to extract this type of oil without industrialization. You go through the process and describe what happens to make vegetable oil, and we'll tag this in the notes. It's the most tagged video we ever tag on the show, the How It's Made episode of canola oil, where they show you this sludgy, gross, nasty crap that they have to bleach and heat and treat with all the chemicals, and you get this nice little golden bottle of canola oil. It's absolutely disgusting. Can you tell us, they kind of describe the process of how vegetable oil is actually made?
Yeah, so the seeds, the 8 vegetable seeds that I've identified as the hateful 8, to clarify that there's 8 of them, and it's not all vegetable seeds or all vegetable oils, right? So maybe I should just list those out.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so there's 3 C's: corn, canola, cottonseed. 3 S's: soy, sunflower, safflower. Memorize those 6 because those are the ones that you're going to see in grocery stores on ingredients. And then there's 2 more that are mostly in restaurants. That is grapeseed and rice bran. And all of those seeds were never really bred to be a source of oil, with the one exception of sunflower. And we can talk about that later if you have questions. But what I'm going to tell you about the processing applies to all 8 of them. And so what happens is that in order to get oil out of these seeds at the scale and with the cheap costs that industry demands, you gotta be efficient. And to extract the oil from soybean with any kind of efficiency, you have to use intense heat, like 400, 600 degrees, lots of pressure, very often a solvent called hexane. So the crude oil that you get is disgusting. It's considered inedible and it reeks. That's why one of the processing steps is called deodorization. It's also full of waxes and gums and inedible things. So it has to be de-waxed and degummed. It's also got toxins in there, and those toxins are removed by bleaching and a bunch of other, different processes. So many processes, that's entire factories, multiple sets of factories in sequence are required to clean up the crude soy oil or the crude canola oil, or even the crude sunflower oil. It's a filthy, disgusting industrial waste kind of a product. Literally, it's inedible, and this is the scientists themselves, they call it inedible. Now, there's nothing else in the food supply like that. We don't say that about olive oil. Olive oil is edible immediately, right? That's what virgin olive oil is. It's unrefined. It's the crude oil. It was just gently pressed, and the oil it's so oily, and the olive oil chemical compounds, the fatty acids are stable so that they don't oxidize once they're exposed to the air. But that's not true with the seed oils. Not only do they need all this heat and pressure, and then the refining strips away the antioxidants that protected the fragile fatty acids, which are called polyunsaturated fatty acids, exposes them to oxygen, and then those will oxidize. And that oxidation takes place forever. Like, it takes place starting in the factory, so that when you buy a bottle of canola oil, it's already got some oxidized fatty acids in there. And then the oxidation just keeps continuing. When the light hits these polyunsaturates, they will oxidize. And when you cook with it, the polyunsaturates will oxidize some more. So the bottles start with a small amount of toxicity, somewhere between 0.6 and 5.2%. So it's a lot. It's not parts per billion here, like other toxins in our food supply. Glyphosate, that's parts per billion or parts per trillion, even in some foods. This is parts per 100. So it's 1,000,000 times more significant. And then it just gets worse because there's oxygen everywhere, right? So it's a whole different thing than anything else we've ever consumed. And what you want to look for is oils that just don't need refining. And so you want to look for a virgin oil, or the term is often unrefined.
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. So you're describing this stuff. It's disgusting, and you said it's inedible. And originally, these companies were making it so they could use it for like lubricant. We were running out of, whale blubber and lubricant and that kind of thing, from what I understand. How did this end up being something that was inedible, but then made it into our food system?
Yeah, so the first little leap was as a substitute for lard. The first leap was in the hydrogenated form, the trans fat form. So it wasn't as liquid vegetable oil because it couldn't be, they did not, back when this happened, the time was at the end of the 1900s. So back then, they didn't have all this degumming, debleaching, all the technology. They just hadn't had it worked out. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't have a clue. But they did know how to hydrogenate, because that's how they were making soap. That's how they were turning the liquid cottonseed oil into solid, right? That's hydrogenation hardens or solidifies an oil by eliminating some of those fragile double bonds. It stabilizes the double bonds, and it turns many of them into saturated bonds. It turns some of them into trans bonds, trans double bonds. And those trans bonds are, they can impart like a lard-like consistency to the fat. And so they just fiddled with the formula until they got it to be very much like lard. And since hydrogenation stabilizes the polyunsaturates, it's actually better than oxidized polyunsaturates because it prevents them from oxidizing into toxins. So even though trans fat has its own toxicity, it doesn't magnify the way the polyunsaturated fatty acid toxins do. So it's way less toxic to eat margarine or Crisco than it is to eat food cooked in highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils, especially when we're talking about like restaurant fryers and stuff where they heat it for days on end.
Yeah, I just want the audience to let that sink in. Margarine and Crisco are vastly better than the things we're cooking with now. I mean, both you and Nina do such a great job writing about this. She writes about it, exit trans fat, enter something worse in her book, The Big Fat Surprise. And like you're talking about these restaurants that used to cook in beef tallow because it was a stable fat. I just talked to a woman a few days ago who in the 70s, she used to work at McDonald's and she would go into this where the vat was and turn it on and would go from a solid to a liquid. You could cook in it repeatedly and it wouldn't easily oxidize or very quickly. The fries tasted amazing. They switched to doing trans and now we're just cooking everything in just plain old vegetable oil, which is way, way worse. Like you said, it's it's so bizarre to contemplate.
Well, Casey, I don't know if you noticed, if you picked up on this, but the thing that I find the most horrific is that the food industry itself was saying, we don't want to go away from trans fat to liquid vegetable oils. It was the food industry that was warning that the trans fat ban, they weren't ready for it because if what they would rather do would stick the lard and tallow back in the fryers. That's what they, if it were up to them, the ones that I talked to, that's what they said. They literally said that. I mean, I would agree with that, but I was kind of shocked that it's what they said too, even though it's more expensive, right? That's what they would rather have done. And so when I asked someone why not make that recommendation, he actually said, well, it's not up to us. They don't ask us. They don't ask the food scientists about what food is more stable in this highly unusual, highly oxidizable environment of a restaurant using a deep fryer. They don't ask us, the experts in it. They ask the American Heart Association. And the American Heart Association, of course, is what they've always said, which is saturated fat is bad, blah, 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 eat vegetable oils. Oh, P.S., did we mention why we say that?
Yeah,
No.
very strange. Great, great segue. You do such a good job writing about the American Heart Association, and you just think of this organization started out as a sleepy little collection of doctors that were responding to, a very rare occurrence. Some people started to get heart attacks around the turn of the 20th century. All of a sudden, that was accelerating and accelerating through the 40s and 50s, and all of a sudden, everybody's having heart attacks. President Eisenhower's out of office for the time that he's out with a heart attack, and all of a sudden, this tiny little organization rises to power. You do such a good job writing about this. Why should we be distrustful about an organization that on the front of it, it says American Heart Association? And like you say in the book, like you would think this is a government agency because of the name, and it's absolutely not. Can you tell us why we need to be suspect of them and their recommendations?
Well, here's why, because in something called conflict of interest, for a medical organization to really be functional in terms of science, which is what medicine is, it's supposed to be a science, they need to be pure of intention. They can't be all about fundraising. And unfortunately, in 1948, there were two groups of people within the American Heart Association with opposite ideas about what their medical association should be doing in order to get at the root cause of heart disease. There was a small group of people who were the purists. They were like, we really can't accept outside funding. It might take longer to get to the answers. It might be harder to spread the word. We might not have the money to do it, but we will have the truth. We're more likely to have the truth. We're more likely to discover the real truth. Whereas the other group was like, wow, don't bother with that. We need to solve this now. People are dying left and right. We don't have the luxury of time. Those are the kinds of arguments I imagine that they were making. It was a very vociferous, the minutes of the meeting were described as very heated. And yeah, so who won? Well, the money, money always talks, right? That's just unfortunately how it is in the capitalist culture that all of us live in. So they voted to accept funding from wherever, but of course the small group, the purists, they said, well, the people that are going to be giving us money are going to be these giant industries, the captains of industry, and that might influence what we say about the cause of heart disease. That was recorded in the minutes, and that's exactly what ended up happening, because who was the first industry to volunteer to give the American Heart Association a whole bunch of money? Well,
Mm,
golly gee, it was Procter and Gamble, and they needed to sell more soy oil and cottonseed oil. And so things being as they were, the American Heart Association, just all of their research somehow, and I go into exactly how, of course, naturally would end up being positive for their benefactors, exactly as anyone who understands human nature would have predicted.
yeah. Well, you do such a good job talking about like leadership in this role. And like to think back, that was back in the 1950s. All of those people who were promoting this at the time, they're all gone. They're all dead now, right? If the organization had strong leadership, they might look back and say, wow, like it would be as if like we invented boats and all these boats were sinking all the time. We didn't go back and say, oh, wow, we just didn't have the design right. We're going to design them correctly now so that all these boats don't sink or all these airplanes don't fall out of the sky anymore or whatever. Like you could say like, okay, we got that wrong. Let's change our recommendations. But the industry ties just get deeper and deeper and deeper. And every time it seems like there's a new study saying like, no, these vegetable oils are really bad for health. They double down. They try to lower cholesterol more, or make more recommendations for seed oil. It's crazy.
Exactly. And it does come down to just a lack of leadership. And, it's why would they lead their people in the right direction when what they're doing right now is working for them? Cha-ching. It's as simple as that. Either you have a moral center or you don't. And when you don't have a moral center, then you follow the money. And that's not being a leader.
That's
That's
right.
all I'm saying, right?
That's right.
That's just being greedy.
Yep. And it was Ansel Keys, as most of us know, was kind of driving this, and he got wrapped up in the American Heart Association. Eventually, it wasn't right off the bat. They were a little bit resistant to his ideas until he gained a little bit more popularity. And we all know his big and boisterous personality and his seeming adoration of his own proper ideas, to the extent that they would throw studies away. They buried, the Ministerial coronary experiment and all the stuff that proved that seed oils were actually worse than regular saturated fat. And so it just, you wonder if something would have been a little bit different through the 50s and 60s, if that could have altered the course of this stuff forever, without putting us backwards so far where we are today.
I know, it's like it's kind of like I compare it to like the disaster of the Titanic, right? There were just so many things aligned for that ship to go down, so many errors, right? It wasn't just that they hit the iceberg, because the guy wasn't, didn't bring his binoculars, supposedly. It wasn't just that there weren't enough lifeboats for everybody. It wasn't just that the engineer didn't bring those baffles all the way up to the top. It was so many things. They locked the doors and people couldn't get out. They would drown people on purpose. So there were so many things that aligned to make the American Heart Association just sustain their evil lie forever, and not apologize. So, right? There were so money is just so powerful, and people, it's like a self-organizing system. People who are greedy and who don't have a moral center or a strong moral compass, they just go with the flow. It's just so much easier, and it becomes like a crystallizing system that locks you in this trap of whatever makes more money. And so the entire, field of preventative medicine now is dangerous because doctors recommend a diet that lowers cholesterol, that's full of seed oils, and makes people unhealthy, which makes more money for the system. And that's how it like locks us in. And the only way out is, we have to see the truth. That's the first step. And so we have to see the light. That's why I want more people to read The Dark Calories that we've been eating.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, Dr. Kate. This money stuff sounds pretty good. Like maybe I don't have enough yachts at this point to cause billions of deaths and untold amounts of suffering out there. It sounds like, if you had a few toys and a bigger house, that might be worth it.
Yeah, the funny thing is, it just so happens that I was just yesterday, I turned down like a multi-million dollar multi-year contract to basically sell out and work for, one of these folks who pushes a lot of supplements. And I was like, I can't do it. It wasn't even the slightest bit tempting. And, a friend was asking me, how do you feel about that? And I was like, look, like, what would I do if I had this, job that was paying me so much money that I didn't need to work? Well, I would quit that job that I don't like. So I'll just save myself all the years of heartache and say no.
Well, good for you. We all appreciate it so very much. So you're able to stick to your guns. Another thing you write about, I didn't realize that this was happening as early as it was. You write about smoking and how smoking had very, very strong ties to heart disease at the time. Again, in 1950s, that's pretty early in my mind for when we started to determine that smoking was actually harmful. I thought it was a little bit later than that, but we had good ideas of other things that may have been causing heart disease, including smoking, that, as you write about, almost had as many ties to heart disease as it did to lung cancer, which blew me away. Why did they suppress that information? As you write about, like the American Heart Association, they didn't have anything against smoking. They could have gone after smoking and put that as part of their recommendations. Why did they not do that?
Yes, well, I mean, the fact that they didn't do that is, it's been very confused. It's confused the whole system, because what happened is people peaked, or smoking peaked right around this time in the 1950s, and the cigarette smoking rates dropped, and because cigarette smoking was the main driver of heart attacks, it makes it easy to make this claim that, well, these dietary recommendations are working, right? Because fewer and fewer heart attacks. And so that's why they couldn't really tell the truth, because Ansel Keys wanted to get credit himself as being the person who solved this deep, dark, important mystery of what is driving heart attacks. And so, so he had to shut down the other ideas. And in the United States, we were way behind England. England started making announcements about the link between cigarette smoking and heart disease in the 1950s, because the data was pointing in that direction, and they were like, what do we got to lose? They're not helping anyone. Cigarette smoke isn't good for anyone, right? So they started making the recommendations years before anybody heard about it here. And the only researcher in the United States who knew that for sure was Ansel Keys and his entire team. Because they were the ones doing more research than anyone else. They had the data, they were seeing the connections, but Ansel Keys kept suppressing it. He would lie about it. He went on to he was interviewed for Time magazine, and he lied about it.
Crazy. Yeah. Well, okay. So far, we've been talking about dietary ways to lower cholesterol. We can lower cholesterol by changing the fats that we consume. For example, if you eat less saturated fat, you eat more vegetable oil, yes, you're going to have lower cholesterol. We also have other ways that we can lower cholesterol, and here we enter pharma. Pharma is more than willing to step in and provide pills. And we've got a few of them, but we can generally classify the biggest kind of category as like statins. We can lower cholesterol by giving people statins. You write extensively about why that may or may not be a great idea. Can you tell us about statin drugs and whether they should be used or not?
Yeah, so statin drugs are my least favorite drugs, my least favorite category of drugs. And I've taken more people off statins than any other drug. And I
Thank
started
you.
doing this decades ago because cholesterol is a nutrient. And the very term high cholesterol suggests that it's a problem, doesn't it? But actually, it should just be called adequate cholesterol when the number is high, because having more cholesterol in our bloodstream seems to correlate with better health outcomes, every which way you look at it, unless you're looking at one of these corrupt studies where they don't show you the actual data. They hide it behind meta-analyses and endpoints and so on and so forth. If you don't, you have to dig down deep to find the truth. that there is no support for the idea that cholesterol even causes heart disease. And you have to dig really deep to, you have to become an independent researcher to really find the truth about the difference in health between people with high cholesterol and low cholesterol. And every which way you slice it, people with high cholesterol look healthier. Why? Because cholesterol is a nutrient. So it's really as simple as that. I mean, we can talk about APO, LP little a, and ApoA and ApoB and HDL and triglycerides and on and make it really complicated. But we don't need to. We can just say high LDL. Well, we shouldn't even call it high. We should redefine it, take over the term ourselves and call it adequate LDL.
Yep. Yeah, and we hear about the number needed to treat. How many people do you need to treat with a statin before you see any kind of benefit? I've heard that number bounce around from the most optimistic being 1 in 24 to the most pessimistic being 1 in 229. The actual benefit that people get is probably way oversold. The risk of taking a statin is probably way undersold. You mentioned a particular video, which I ended up watching, which was Statins Made Me Stupid, where this guy talks about like his cognitive decline on taking a statin for a pretty limited amount of time. He was unable to play, pretty simple games with his family, and he kept forgetting things. And like, even he was admitting in this video, like they told me to do this because I need to, reduce my cholesterol, which he was during the video was still on board with, but he was like, I should be careful with this. So I want my cholesterol to go down, but all these side effects are so terrible. I don't know whether the trade-off is worth it. And so it would be one thing if it was like, yeah, we're giving this to 229 people and maybe one person got helped, but nobody got harmed. But that's the problem, is these medications harm tons of people that it doesn't help.
And doctors are not taught about all these different side effects. We're not taught to take them, and the side effects that we are taught about, we're taught to minimize and tell them they're not important, right? So the side effects that doctors learn about include muscle aches. And so, there's famous cardiologists who are like, well, one of my patients, he really couldn't even like cross the street safely because he was so weak, he couldn't exactly lift his leg to get up over the curve. So he kept falling, but he's got to take a statin. I mean, that is absurd, right? The guy is more likely to be hit, but even if the statins do have a benefit. And I want to talk about the fact, the reason that doctors think they have a benefit when they probably don't have any, and they probably are only harmful. But other side effects doctors do learn about are pretty severe, like diabetes, right? Oh, it's worth it though to prevent a heart attack. It's okay if you get diabetes for life. Heart muscle weakness. Many doctors don't learn about that, but it is, an accepted side effect. Muscle weakness. What is the heart? It's a muscle. And there are lots of research that shows that taking these drugs for your heart health gives you heart failure. I mean, it's just absurd. The number of and types of different side effects. It also suppresses your immune system and it increases your susceptibility to serious infections. I've seen people have life-threatening infections because of their statin, and I stopped their statin. And it also increases your risk of dementia, cancer, and on it goes, right? Because lowering cholesterol reduces your health. Cholesterol is an antioxidant, and oxidative stress causes disease. Why do we want to increase our susceptibility to oxidative stress? We don't. Plain and simple.
Yeah. Thank you. You cited a study in there that I was unaware of, where they took people and took them off of their statins. And you cited all the things that they improved with their conditions, their heart, all that stuff. And you wonder, like, okay, are there going to be dead bodies from all these people now dropping dead of heart attacks? And there sure weren't. You know what I mean? Like, people were doing fine without it. And so I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you've helped people kind of get off of that. The book is called Dark Nutrition, but there actually is some light in the book. The story, Dark Calories, excuse me, Deep Nutrition, Dark Calories.
Everybody does that.
There is some light in the book, and I'm at the part of the book, I'm listening to it, I'm not quite done with it, but I'm at the part of the book that you're naming all of my favorite people that you cite, like Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Chris Palmer, Dr. Georgia Ede, Dr. Thomas Seyfried, a bunch of these people that are former guests, people that I've gotten to talk to and meet in person, and just have wonderful stories of healing. What is the solution to all of this mess? What are some of these people doing out there that is going against the grain, so to speak, of the traditional knowledge and the American Heart Association, for example?
Well, the way I see it, what they all have in common is they've lost their fear of high cholesterol, right? They've lost their fear of foods that raise high cholesterol. They started recommending healthy fats like butter. They've started recommending high protein, nutrient dense foods like steaks and eggs, right? That's what they all have in common. They have lost this programmed fear that, believe me, it's really deep. I don't know, what your training was like, but it took me a long time to get to the point where I am now, where I can say that, yeah, high LDL is actually a good thing. When I first wrote Deep Nutrition, I thought maybe, if your LDL was 3 times your HDL, maybe that could be bad. Now I'm not so sure, although I'm still not, we don't have enough data to know really, what is the best indicator. But LDL itself is not the problem. The problem is something else. Now, all these other folks that you just mentioned are also recommending getting away from seed oils. And when they make that recommendation to their patients, what they're doing for their patients' benefit that they don't explicitly even know is they're reducing oxidative stress. A lot of these practitioners do realize that. But I know that they didn't when I first started talking to them because they didn't know what it was. And I've been in this space for 20 something years. So I've seen the whole keto conversation totally shift. The first meetings that I went to where there were pro keto doctors, they didn't mention vegetable oils. They didn't know what they were. They were like, yeah, go ahead and eat your butter and stuff like that, but they did not specifically explicitly say to stay away from vegetable oil. That has shifted now since these books have come out. I've got this little collection here. Whether
Beautiful.
the doctors have read it or not, they've heard enough about it by now that they are making this extremely most important, very beneficial recommendation. And the thing that I want people to take home with dark calories is that you can follow a keto diet, you can follow a carnivore diet, but the reason that the keto diet works is not the ketones. I mean, as amazing as the keto diet is, and as great as ketones make you feel, the vast majority, the workhorse of adopting today's version of a keto diet is that it directs people away from these oxidative stress inducing, disease inducing, death in a bottles of vegetable oil.
Yeah, it is amazing to see how that has transformed, and I would credit your work 100% to that. But getting that message out there, you don't hardly hear any of these talks at some of these conferences where they don't equally blame carbohydrates and the seed oils at the same time. So it is interesting to see that shift quite a bit.
And at
And I
least
did
they mention them now, right? Like
right,
that did not happen,
right.
period. And now at least they mention them. So that's great.
Yeah. Yep. And then when I'm out to dinner with my fellow carnivores and like everybody's making an order and like people are asking, what is this cooked in? If this is cooked in, any kind of seed oil, I'm going to get something different or we're going to go to a different restaurant. I thought it was very interesting. I look at your work and I feel like you've been really great at being diet agnostic. You haven't like subscribed yourself and your brand to one particular diet. And you say in the book that a keto diet is really good, but there's ways to make it a little bit better, which I love. I'm not to the part yet where you kind of explain that in the book. And I kind of was the same way. Like when I got into low carbohydrate space, I was like, oh, the keto diet, this is the best thing to do. Where now I think like, okay, it's probably just better if people are in ketosis for some of their life and enjoy the benefits of, like you described, like, yes, you get some benefits from ketones, but also you get all the benefits of eliminating all the other crap. So if somebody is thinking, okay, I've heard the keto word, how do I make this diet work for me and make it be a little bit better? What things do you talk about there?
Yeah. So what I would say is, if you find that cutting your carbohydrates makes you feel like you're just really craving carbs, you get the low carb flu, your energy goes down, you don't feel as good as you're supposed to, you get muscle aches, you get sweats, your heart starts racing. If you have any kind of problem whatsoever, that's a red flag for you. I wouldn't say just treat it with minerals. Like those kind of symptoms don't occur with, mineral deficiencies. Those symptoms are consistent with something else entirely. Those symptoms come from energy deficits in the body. And that's what I talk about in chapter 3 and chapter 4 of Dark Calories, where insulin resistance, nobody's talking about it in a way that I think makes sense, which is insulin resistance is not caused by sugar. It's not caused by carbohydrates. It is actually a need for more, a physiologic need for more sugar than the bloodstream is designed to carry. And so when people are insulin resistant, and 99% of the population is insulin resistant, I don't know if you picked up on that one. So that's a big bomb to drop. Yeah, so pretty much everybody's insulin resistant. And when you're insulin resistant, if you stop eating carbohydrates, your body is going to go into a little bit of a stress overdrive, especially if you're not cutting out the seed oils, like at least 95% cutting them out. What happens is your body starts converting your body starts trying to raise the blood sugar back up between meals the only way that it can. And that can be bad for you. That's why you get the low carb flu, because you don't have enough energy and your body is going into an adrenal kind of overdrive where doctors call it an increased sympathetic tone. The adrenaline is being released because your brain senses blood sugar dropping. There's nothing more powerful as a stressor in human physiology than dropping blood sugar. And so as a result, our adrenaline, we start pumping out adrenaline and cortisol. And those two hormones can mobilize protein from wherever it's stored, your bone, your muscle, wherever. The body's ruthless because it needs sugar. And then it will start converting your muscle into sugar. We're seeing that with Ozempic, right? When people are basically, they're eating less, right? They're eating less often. And people are losing disproportionate amounts of lean muscle, and nobody can explain it. Well, I just explained it.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't quite explain the whole thing. There's a little more to it, but what I call the energy model of insulin resistance that I talk about there is the root cause of insulin resistance is oxidative stress, and the energy model of insulin resistance explains why we lose so much lean mass on Ozempic. It also explains the low carb flu. So like looking at the problem of metabolic disease through the lens of oxidative stress, which is a root cause etiology, makes more sense to me than looking at it through the lens of, macros, right? Well, we need to adjust our macros. That's basically what the conversation has been. Either we've blamed it on fat or sugar or animal protein, right? So it's like the whole conversation is just this blinders about macros. Meanwhile, we all have disorders of oxidative stress if we've been eating a modern diet, and no one's talking about it. So I want to put oxidative stress on the map, and if you can help me do that, Casey, I will appreciate that.
Well, I will do the best that I can for sure. It's such a big story, and you do, like I said, such a great job telling that story in your book. You also involve some personal stories. Do you have some of your favorites, the first ones that come to mind of, not only you in your life and cleaning them out, but other people that you've been able to help either get them off of some of these crappy medications or change their diet and their lifestyle? Anything that come to mind about somebody who took your advice and just saw amazing benefit?
Well, I'll tell you one I just heard the day before yesterday, which was it was a woman who had kind of mysterious chronic fatigue and just achiness and wasn't really able to function as a wife and mother. And she a couple of years ago, and then she encountered deep nutrition, and she changed her diet. And within a couple of months, her energy was, she was feeling so much better that like she started running around the room just because she suddenly realized, wow, I have so much more energy than I did, a couple of months ago. This is amazing. And her daughter was so inspired by that as I think she was like 10 or 11 at the time, she started becoming, like a little mini fan of deep nutrition and the FatBurn Fix.
Wow.
And I heard from her a couple of days ago because she had then now read Dark Calories, which is pretty high tech book in there, and she wanted my help presenting the science to her. I think it's like a 7th or 8th grade class, right? She was like, how do I break this down for my fellow students? It was like so touching. But yeah, because I mean, it completely changed her ability to function as a wife and mother. She's a homeschooling mom, so it was very important for her to be able to have that energy for her children because gosh, it's hard to homeschool. I don't know if you know anybody who does it, but boy, it
Yeah,
seems
of
like it's
course.
oh, you do.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, and it's summer break for everybody around here, so everybody's homeschooling at the moment. I think
Oh yeah.
there's some underslept parents all over the place. That's amazing. What a great story. And if I hadn't heard that story over and over and over again in this community, it might be like hard to believe, but it is so many different anecdotes and case studies that we hear out there of people that are just completely returning back to good health. The last thing I wanted to ask you about, something that we see around our house all the time. I get to see your face every single day. It's animated, but it is on our containers of collagen that we
Oh,
have here. CB supplements. We were introduced to Charlie, excuse me. We were introduced to him several years ago. My wife works primarily with people with injuries and myofascial tissue, and so she does a lot of work with connective work. And so we sling all kinds of CB supplements to people and lots of collagen. Apparently, you're very picky. You're not taking sellouts for multi-million dollars to support any supplement line, but you did decide to put your actual animated face on this one. Why did you decide to get involved with Charlie and what he was doing, and why do you feel so strongly about his supplements and how he does things?
yeah, well, there's not a lot of foods that sustain the dehydration process. But it turns out, fortunately, that collagen and the stuff that basically bone broth is made out of, those amino acids and combinations of amino acids and sugars that just happen to be some of the most oxidation resistant that we know of, in the entire that we could possibly eat that are nutrients. So, and that's what it comes down to, right? Like, so I'm against vegetable oils because they oxidize easily. I'm against most protein powders because, things like whey protein, but the dehydration process exposes the amino acids to oxygen, and amino acids contain nitrogen, and nitrogen and oxygen is literally explosive. That's why 4 out of the 5 most explosive things are made out of nitrogen, and it reacts with oxygen and explodes. So the bone broth, the collagen hydrolysates that are in the CB supplements are resistant to oxidation. So they can handle that, the need to be dehydrated there, to stick them into a powderized form and make it, easy to transport and all that kind of stuff that makes it practical and a lot less costly than making or buying bone broth, from scratch. So that's why I can support that supplement. And, they're careful to source from places that they know will pass the test, and they actually do tests on heavy metals. It has to be NSF certified. It has to be free of heavy metals. It has to be free. It has to be all organic, right? So that's why I support that group.
I love that. I'm so glad you called it food and not necessarily a supplement. We don't sell very many we don't sell any supplements. We don't recommend very many supplements, but that is definitely one we try to get with all of our clients, and we've seen so much benefit in our personal lives and with the lives of our clients. So it's really cool that you endorse that. Dr. Cate, like I said, this has been a conversation that I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. It's been such an honor to chat with you and learn from you. In a way, I'm glad that I'm not fully done with the book. I get to continue on listening to the book, which I'm really quite enjoying. You do such a good job in writing that. But for now, where can people go to find you and connect with you in your work, and where can they pick up your new book, Dark Calories?
Great. Well, thank you for asking. So please visit my website, which is drcate.com, spelled DRCATE.com. And if you do, sign up for my newsletter while you're there by scrolling down to the bottom where it says, get free goodies or sign up for my newsletter or something like that. The free goodies are kind of like your reward for giving me your email. And then once a month or so, I send out a newsletter. I don't have a lot of products. I don't have any products to sell myself. And I certainly don't bombard your inbox with ads for stuff. It's just like, here's what I've been up to. Here's my latest article.
Excellent. Okay, well, I subscribe to very few newsletters, and I'm going to go right now to go subscribe to yours. That sounds wonderful. Again, this has been such a great conversation. And when I'm thinking about how this is going to affect people. Obviously, we think about everybody with really poor metabolic health in this country. I also think about this new subset of people that I know personally who are living with very, very high levels of cholesterol because they're treating things like bipolar and making very difficult decisions about whether they should experience symptoms of bipolar or whether to knock those out and live with a very high cholesterol. And your work helps people feel a lot better about that. So it's really special and meaningful. And I just love the way that you write and the way you presented everything in your book. So thank you so very much for all of your work. And thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. We really appreciate you.
Well, it's been a pleasure to meet you and to speak with you and to spend time with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.